America is be true to what you said on paper.
Welcome to the Chalkboard Conversations VODcast, presented by Party Politics US. Our guest this evening is the Honorable Sharon Pratt, former mayor of Washington, D.C., and the first woman to hold a position.
This is an honor for us to have you here. For me, I went to Dunbar High School. I did go away to school at Virginia State University, but this is, to be able to talk to you this evening, one about you, and then also about some of just the things that you've done. We're right now in Black History Month, and as I was reading your bio, I was just kind of going, wow, there's another first. You were the first, I believe, were you the first female or first woman vice president at Pepco?
That's right.
And then, but we have you here. I want to talk a little bit, or start the conversation to talk about the institute that you're leading now, the Institute for Politics, Policy, and History, and hopefully take that into a conversation. We're going to bring my co-host back in a little bit to talk about DC statehood, which has become a very big conversation here, and a lot of people getting excited about it. And I'd love to hear your insight in terms of what is our path to get there. But can you tell us a little bit about the Institute for Politics, Policy, and History?
Okay, well, delighted to be here, but also delighted to talk about what we call at IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History. It was launched by Mayor Bowser and the president of the University of the District of Columbia in January of 2019. We have a mission, which I know you'll be excited about, rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C. Tends to be a very much overlooked, not well chronicled history. But also at the same time, trying to drill down on what we call the touchstone issues, the issues that have always plagued our country. And, as we rediscover the history of Washington, D.C., we'll discover is that the fact that we even ended up being the capital had a lot to do with one of those touchstone issues. The country arguably should have gone to New York, where George Washington had the oath of office administered, or Philadelphia, where the Continental Congress existed, any number of places. They ended up in D.C. Why? Because it was a slaveholding community. That is why. Jefferson and Madison wanted it in a slaveholding community. And so there we are, the contradiction of America. Even as she begins, she chose to have a venue where slavery was practiced. And that has a lot to do with how DC has been treated over many years. So that's an important part of our history.
Yes, ma'am. And, when you mentioned that, I saw your interview that you did on Great Day, Washington. And it came to mind the piece that you talked about Hamilton, and what you just mentioned. That's one of my favorite plays. And that is actually one of my favorite songs, is The Room Where It Happened.
Right.
Because I've been reading so much about DC history. My mom, she was born in Virginia, but she came here at 13 years old. And I feel like she drilled down Black history. She drilled down DC history. She's got a community center that she started years ago called United to Rise, Your Community Center, where she took kids all around the city during summer camps called Camp on the Go.
That's great.
To teach them about the history of the city. And all of her 5 kids at some point got to work in the camp. So that meant that we also were learning as we were going around. And, when we think about how DC got here, and for her teaching us and making sure that we knew about Black history, and more so than just Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, going back to the time to slavery, even before we came here. What really strikes me is the fact that this all keeps going back to slavery. Even the way that the Electoral College is, even the way that, there was a 3/5 compromise, saying that slaves only counted for 3/5, that the South, and why so many of the first presidents were from Virginia or from the South. You were the mayor of the city. Were there things that you came across as the mayor that we wouldn't typically have come across as citizens that you take and that you lean upon now in terms of the work that you're doing to try and bring about statehood to the citizens of the District of Columbia?
Well, I mean, just being the mayor of Washington, D.C., being, as you know, a resident of Washington, D.C., even today, although we've matured a lot, we're treated as second-class citizens. I mean, we're totally disrespected. If you're in any other state, the Congress is an institution that works for you. Here, you sort of are answering to Congress. You don't really have the authority of any sovereign entity, even though you're over 700,000 people. You pay taxes, you have people who defend the country, and we've always paid more in federal taxes than we ever got back. And nobody subsidizes us. We are paid supposedly for the services we provide to the Congress, to too many federal entities. And there's over 40% of the land mass here is non-taxable. So that was the reason for a federal payment, never commensurate to what the people of the District of Columbia did and provided. So there's so many ways. There is a tone, there's a tenor about who you are in the District of Columbia and how you must prove yourself. You must prove yourself. Nobody asked Tennessee to prove themselves before they were admitted a state. Nobody asked any other state, North Carolina, or they were part of the 13 original colonies. But any other state, to have Montana to prove themselves. But here, there is that tone, and that tone is a part also of the racial biases that have always existed in America, and very much. And so, particularly by the Civil War, we then became a significantly Black city, and part of it was that people were fleeing the South and other places because the Union then at that point was had embraced the notion of abolishing slavery.
So what's the path? This is the part that I'm really intrigued about. What's the path to get us to statehood? Because historically, I've worked for the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. I got to travel around the country talking to state legislators. I have relationships with many of them. And they often said, when I told, hey, do you know DC does not have a vote in Congress? Many of them had no idea.
Nobody knows, yeah.
And so,
and that's how they get away with it. I mean, when I was pushing it, I've been obsessed with it all my life. I don't know. Well, here I was, I was born in DC, and here you were born in the city. At that time, you couldn't vote for anything. Mm-hmm. And it was just so insulting that here you are, the home of this great democracy, but you have no participation. And so often, I mean, home rule was considered a joke when people started raising it. And Walter Fauntroy, to his great credit, was very active in going after Broyhill, who was the congressman out of Virginia, real segregationist, to help defeat him. When they defeated him, that's when they were able to enact legislation for home rule. So people always laugh anytime we bring it up. I always bring it up because it's so insulting to me, insulting that we are citizens of this country, but we're really not treated as citizens of this country. It's offensive. And so I think we've got a shot now. We've got a president who's a Democrat, and for statehood. A long time, you had a lot of Democrats who did not want to step up to statehood. He is there. Vice President Harris is there. Pelosi has been there a long time, aggressively for statehood. And now Schumer is aggressively for statehood. And no, arguably, you've got to be able to eliminate the filibuster to get the requisite number of votes. But I think we've got to go for broke, because there's a possibility the Democrats will also vote to eliminate the filibuster. They may have to. If the Republicans, as we see even in the impeachment proceedings, are lockstep with what is now the Trump party.